Hello everyone, my name is Coach Dorn, and I'm going to be showing you the most absolute basics of PC building. This is for the most beginner of beginners, but hopefully this analogy, if you already know about computer parts, may actually help you learn how to communicate how easy it is to other people about how to build computers. Essentially, I am going to be comparing the computer to parts of the human body. I'm going to be simplifying this as much as possible. So if you have any questions at the end, please leave them in the comments below. First off, we are going to start with the spookiest part of the human body, and that is the skeleton. The skeleton in this case is going to be your computer case. It is essentially just holding parts together. It is making sure things aren't toppling on top of each other. There's no other reason for it other than creating a air vacuum for fans to pull in air and then to push out air. That's the only other reason for it. It holds things in place and helps put air on the parts. Secondly, we have the heart, which is of course going to be red. The heart in this case is going to be the power supply. The power supply is going to put juice throughout everything in your system. Do you need the world's best, biggest power supply? Absolutely not. But would I opt in for something that costs $10 off of Craigslist? No, that might start a fire. Please don't do that. Thirdly, we have the spinal column. Now, the spinal column is very underrated in the human body, but it allows the body parts to communicate with each other, right? You want your brain to be able to talk to your arms. You want your brain to be able to talk to your legs, and you got to know when you're hungry or how often your heart should beat, etc. That is what your spinal column is for. It's a communication hub, and that's the motherboard. The motherboard in this case does the same exact thing. It communicates between each part in the computer, how much power it should be getting, what it should be doing, where the information should be going. It's just a networking hub. And a problem a lot of people have whenever they look at a motherboard is they see all of these kind of like little knobs and transistors and resistors and capacitors and circuitry and stuff. You do not touch any of that. None of that actually needs to be touched whatsoever. Most of the stuff that you will be touching when you build a computer are parts that click into place using small plastic tabs. So when you look at a motherboard, do not get scared. Do not say, wow, that's just a lot of stuff. I don't want to touch it. I don't want to mess with it. You're not going to be messing with it to begin with. It's there simply because they can't cover it up. Next up, we have the brain. The human brain, of course, is responsible for doing all the calculations and stuff that you have throughout the day, all the thinking, etc. It's not hard to figure out what a brain is for. If you need to figure out what a brain is for, maybe this tutorial isn't for you. CPU, though, does exactly what the brain does. It does all the heavy calculations, it figures out where things need to go, what things need to happen, etc., and then it talks to the rest of the system. Easy peasy. Now, when it comes to matching a CPU to a motherboard, we're going to go over this later, there's a specific socket type that matches with it. You can't get, a large screw and fit it into a small nut. There's going to be a few guys out there that disagree, but you get my point. There are specific socket types so they fit each other. The same thing goes for the RAM, the same thing goes for the video card, etc. And there's different sizes of motherboards and everything out there, but we're going to go over that more later. Now, every brain needs long-term memory and short-term memory. The long-term memory tends to come in something that's like a hard drive or a solid-state drive, which tends to be smaller, much skinnier, or the newer thing, which is an M.2 drive. An M.2 drive is essentially like a thumbstick that attaches directly to your motherboard and works as the hard drive. Normally, the hard drive and the solid-state drive, the SSD, they need wires going to the power supply and then to the motherboard and things like that. For a beginner build nowadays, though, I would recommend finding something that can fit an M.2 drive because it just fits into a slot and there's no external wiring to worry about. It's fairly nice. So there's your long-term memory. Hey, I need to remember this event for later, etc. Hey, I want you to store this game for me for later. But now we need short-term memory, and short-term memory is your RAM, your random access memory. And random access memory means I need to be able to pull up this information at random whenever it's specifically called for, right? So this Microsoft Paint presentation is being done using RAM. The Audacity recording that you're listening to right now is done using RAM. Bringing up the internet browser is using RAM. It saves just a ton of things that need to be pulled up on the fly at the snap of your fingers. That's why anything that was stored in the RAM, like your web browsing and everything like that, is usually not saved after you restart the computer, because it's live, it's on the fly. It's not something that's supposed to be stored for later. Next up, we're gonna have the muscle. What color would muscle be? Why not? Okay, there's your video card. Your video card tends to be the lifter, the heavy big guy who does all of the essential calculations for all of your games. It wants to remember all the textures that you need. It wants to remember all of the lighting, the shadows. It wants to do all of the heavy lifting for your video games. Do you always need a video card like for a work computer? No. But if you want to play video games at all these days, your video card is going to be necessary. These are the most basic parts when it comes to a computer. So I'm going to show you the starting process on how to build your own computer using a website called PCPartPicker.com. This website I highly recommend to many people who ask me questions about how to get into PC building, as this website actually tells you what is wrong with your build, tells you where there's a sale, tells you if there's voltage issues. It essentially tells you if you picked the wrong parts. So when you go to PCPartPicker.com, there's going to be System Builder at the top. There's also build guides and things like that that'll also help you more in-depth tutorials and other people who have submitted their own builds for other people to possibly partake in. When you come to PCPartPicker.com, you're going to see estimated wattage, no compatibility issues, etc. Let's start off by picking a computer. Or a CPU. This is not going to be like a dream build. This is not going to be a budget build. I am essentially just going to be picking parts to show you how it all fits and works together. Let's go with this i7 9700K. When I click on it, you scroll down, there's going to be specifications, what type of wattage, what's the base clock, and etc. How many cores, socket type. This is what I was talking about when it comes to the fitting on the motherboard. So if I were to select this one, LGA 1151, that means it'll only fit in any motherboards that have LGA 1151. So when we scroll through, when we're choosing a motherboard, there's going to be the option to select it by that slot type right here, socket type. The system already knows that that's what you have selected as a CPU. You're probably going to want to select this one. So you select that one. Now you have all of these different options. When you go through these options, there's a few things you have to consider, because a motherboard isn't something you can just pop in and pop out. You have to remember everything else is connected to it. Everything else needs to talk to it, etc. When I look at this motherboard, your RAM is going here, your CPU is going here, your video card goes here, and you see this little slot right here, and then these screw tabs. That's where that M.2 drive I told you about is going to go. That's where that slips in. That's your permanent long-term memory that's just going to slip in. No cables. These plastic tabs are what holds these components in place. You just snap in RAM. That's it. You just snap in your video card. You sort of snap in your M.2. You snap in, you see there's even like a little metal lever here. you snap in your CPU. There's nothing complicated. All of these resistors and things like that, you don't touch. You never mess with any of this. If you accidentally mess with it, I can understand. Maybe you accidentally chipped it or something, but you're probably going to be very careful to begin with if this is your first build. Then you have all of these pins down at the bottom. This is probably the only actual complicated thing you're going to be doing, because these pins, it's going to show you in an instruction manual what does what. It really is Lego easy. But some of these pins are going to be connected to some of your fans in your system. Some of these pins are going to be connected to like the power button on your desktop tower. So, I mean, that's how the computer knows to turn on. It's not magic. It's not wireless or anything. It doesn't just communicate. There needs to be a wire to it that says, hey, you press the button. So, there's some assembly required here. But the major components of what I showed you are as easy as snapping parts into place. So, we're going to pick that one. And the website's already telling me there's a compatibility issue. So, let's go down below and see what's going on. It says it does not include a stock cooler. That means that the CPU does not come with a fan, so we're going to pick out a fan. We're not going to do water cooling, anything complex or stupid. We're just going to pick something. There you go, $35 for a fan. Voila, it'll fit. Great. Now that we have that sorted out, we get to some of the more fun parts. We have RAM to worry about. Now, RAM, I would recommend in the year 2020 of our Lord, or wherever the hell you are in time, just pick 16 gigs. 16 gigs or higher. Do not settle for anything that's 8 gigs or lower. Try and get yourself 16 gigs or higher. A lot of games and programs like that are very demanding. You could always, if you have the budget, you can do 32 gigs. That's fine. But I would recommend 16 gigabytes. So let's go ahead and add that. This is DDR4 RAM. Normally, when it comes to desktops, you do have to worry about specific slot types as well, just like you would with the CPU and the motherboard. Same thing you would have to worry about with the RAM and the motherboard. Normally, there's a pin type, but most RAM that you're going to buy is 288 pin. Most RAM that you're going to buy. So that's kind of like a standard. Imagine it's sort of like USB. Like everyone's like, okay, so this is probably the best option that we have for everyone to get along with. So a lot of these companies tend to do that same thing. Here we are with the SSDs, hard drives, etc. Let me show you why you don't want to do a hard drive for your regular builds and stuff like that. Now, a hard drive is good for recording video. It's good for long-term storage of files you want to keep on the back burner, stuff like that. It's not really your best bet for games nowadays. So if you plan on saving a lot of files like torrents, movies, things like that, hard drive, fantastic bet. But it's chunky, it has moving parts in it, etc. Not the best bet for long-term gaming or anything. Now, your SSD is a lot like a hard drive, a solid-state drive, except it is a board with some chips on it. Instead, there's no moving parts. It uses the same connectors as the hard drive, and it's skinnier, it's lighter, it's faster. If you want to go with an SSD, go ahead. Just understand that it still needs more cables than the M.2 for your beginner build. When we get into an M.2, here it is. This is it. It is just this small, skinny stick. This is where the screw goes to hold it into place, and this is the notch where it transfers data. That's it. You plug it into that one space that I showed you earlier on the motherboard, and now you have said space. There's a little bit more to it, but now you have said space. Whew. Let's see. Video card. Let's pick out your muscle. Now, one of the rules of thumb I like to tell people is that when you are picking out, or at least building a computer, opt in for a CPU that's considerably better than the video card you're getting. Reason being is that you want your CPU to last longer than a lot of the other parts in your system. Replacing a CPU might also mean that you'll have to replace the motherboard, which means that you also might have to replace the RAM. You're going to have to replace a few other parts. I opt in for getting a better CPU over getting a better video card. Some of these guys, they get really cheap CPUs. They think the CPU doesn't matter and they opt in big money on the video card. And at first their games are going to run fine, but they don't realize that their cheap CPU is actually making it harder for the video card to function, because the video card needs to get information from the CPU. Like, the CPU needs to talk to the video card. So if you have a CPU that's going, oh, yeah, the whole time, but the video card is like, come on, man, give me information, like, talk to me, you are slowing down the process because you didn't opt in for higher end parts. So a video card, especially at a beginner rate, you shouldn't mind doing $200 to $400, especially entry level. This is your first build after all. You can opt in for a better video card later. It snaps in and pulls right back out. You don't need to replace the whole motherboard or worry about socket types all too much with video cards. Just like RAM, they all tend to have their own special fitting that everyone sort of agrees on at this point. So for an example, I don't even know what this one is. A 2060 Super. That's fine. I know a few people with these. A 2060 Super. $400. We're just going to add that. Now, when we look at these pins here, you're thinking, maybe I need to worry about the pin type, the connection type, etc. Yes and no. See, all motherboards nowadays have something called a PCIe slot. And the PCIe slot has different numbers in different versions, but it's a lot like USB. Like, you know, the USB ports, you know, USB drives. Like, yeah, there's USB 2.0 and USB 3.0 and stuff like that. It's still USB. It'll still work, but it just works at different speeds. So if you want to maximize the speed that your video card is able to do, imagine it like a car or a highway. Yeah, a highway. You have 16 lanes of traffic. God forbid you actually ever see something like that, but you have 16 lanes of traffic. When your motherboard says it has a PCIe times 8 slot, your video card won't be able to utilize the full potential of that data, because now you're taking 16 lanes and cramming it into 8. Sure, the video card will still fit. It'll still communicate with the motherboard without any kind of actual issues. It'll just not work to its full potential, right? You want 16 lanes to match up with 16 lanes. So a slightly more advanced tool tip is to keep your eye open for that, especially whenever you're trying to opt in for maybe like a cheaper motherboard. Pay attention to the actual interface types that are on it. So we're just going to add that. Here we go. Let's go back into the motherboard real quick so I can show you. Here it is. PCIe. 3 slots. There you go. That's this slot right here. That's this big old slot. Then you got another one, and then you got another one. You have plenty of different expansions and products out there that can actually fit into these slots. They're not just for video cards, but we're not going to go into that. Now, a case tends to be the make or break for some people, depending on the size of these things. An ATX full tower is something a lot of people opt in for in case they want to add water cooling and things like that. These things are just absolutely monstrous. They have tons of room everywhere on the inside for everything you could possibly rig together. For your beginner builds, especially if you plan on expanding outward one day, this is also the very generic view that a lot of people have of a gaming computer. It's an ATX mid tower. And a mid tower, it's not really going to have like a whole lot of room for ridiculous amounts of cooling or water cooling or anything like that, but it is going to have room for you to eventually maybe upgrade that CPU fan to like a water cooled fan and add some fans up here, but you're not going to have room for like tanks, like water tanks and things like that. Not the super advanced stuff. So when we choose a case, keep that in mind. You don't want to get something that's like a mini or a micro, because that tends to be like shoebox size stuff. That tends to be like super tiny stuff for enthusiasts that want to jam pack a lot of power into one super small package. So let's pick this one. Why not? There's a lot more to going into mind when picking out these things, like fan placement, like what comes with it, etc. But for this, for a beginner build, voila. Power supplies. Now, power supplies, a lot of people tend to overshoot. You definitely do not want to undershoot. It's okay to overshoot. Your system isn't going to freak out or set on fire. You can buy, you see how there's an estimated wattage here of close to 400? You could buy a 1,000-watt power supply and the system will work just fine. The power supply only gives power as it's needed. So if for some reason your system goes up to 1,000, it'll go ahead and give you up to 1,000 watts. What I would recommend, especially for a lot of people who are beginning builds, is to opt in for something that's slightly higher than what's being recommended. This recommends close to 400 watts. I wouldn't recommend getting exactly 400 watts, because when your computer is running hard and it's saying, hey, I need more power, this game is running a lot of calculations of what's going on, no, you want to make sure you're covered, or else your computer will just shut off. If it doesn't get enough power, it's just going to flatline, beep, which can be bad for the system, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. When you buy power supplies, there are 3 types of power supplies. There's fully modular, there's semi-modular, and then there's not modular at all. So when I go into, let's say, yeah, sure. When I go into this one, this is a not modular power supply. It has cords hardwired to the power supply. So any cables that you end up not using end up sitting in your system, collecting dust, taking up extra room. It's an older way. It's definitely a cheaper way, as you can see, of doing it, thanks to the prices on the right. I wouldn't recommend it. For ease of access and for learning how your system works, I would highly suggest doing a fully modular. And a fully modular means all of the cables are not hardwired to it, and you just plug in what you need. So you see MB for motherboard. You plug in your motherboard cables. You have CPU fans. You have video card. You have SATA, which are your 2 hard drives if you have those, and then peripherals for anything extra like RGB lighting and extra fans, etc. It makes it simpler because now you're only using cables that you need. Now you only need to tuck away what you need. It does cost a little extra, but I would highly recommend getting a fully modular power supply. Remember, at a slightly higher rate. Notice how that one was 550 watts. What if I end up getting something slightly better than the 2060 down the line, right? Like, I have a really good CPU, right? I don't need to touch any of that. You know, think about it 3 or 4 years from now. 4 years from now, I'm thinking to myself, I could really use just a video card upgrade. You don't need to upgrade anything else. That's the whole point. You pop out the video card, you still have some extra wattage in case the video card does need some higher wattage. And you snap it in, and now none of your system, nothing else needs to be touched. Nothing else needs to be upgraded. And that's why I opt in for getting a decent CPU at the gate, so you don't have to touch it down the line. If you were to buy something really cheap now, then 40 years from now, it's going to be even worse. So please opt in for a decent CPU, close to around 300 bucks. I know that can be a tall order, right? But you want to do something like that. You want to make sure it lasts you 4 or 5 years or until you build the next one. And I've built quite a few. I've been down this road. This is from personal experience. Woo. So when it comes to the optical drive, the operating system, you can normally order operating systems like Windows 10 and things like that on thumb drives. And you'd have to go through the whole installation process, and there's more tutorials and things like that online. For right now, though, this is the beginner build. This has been my tutorial. Hopefully, this helps you not feel so scared when it comes to building a computer. That was the whole point of this. I wanted this to be as entry level as possible. I want you to go out there. I want you to be enthusiastic about building a computer. I want you to realize that it's not as hard as you first glance at it. It really is as easy as snapping parts into place, as long as you realize what those socket types are, as long as you are willing to learn and put things together. It's easy. It's Lego easy. All of these computer parts, the motherboard, the power supply, the case, they all come with the cables that you need. They all come with instruction manuals and things like that. It's Lego easy now, and there's a reason why PC gaming has picked up so much, and it's not just because of the graphics or anything. It's the accessibility. It's how easy it is to put something together now. So please take it easy. Don't stress out over any of this. If you have any questions, like I said, leave them in the comments below. I have been Coach Dorn. Have a good one.